Why does Iceland, one of the coldest countries on Earth, hold one of the only banana plantations in Europe? The answer has a lot to do with why Iceland has become so rich despite its hostile environment. Two things define Iceland's economic history: its location and its tiny population. Iceland sits alongside Greenland in the northern Atlantic, with its capital Reykjavik north of Anchorage, Iqaluit, and Nuuk. Food has a hard time growing in this cold of a climate, and, as I'm sure you know, humans can't live without food. So Iceland's population has always remained quite small as a result, fluctuating around 50,000 people for much of its history as it battled with famines and plagues. The country was poorly endowed, not even having many trees, and for over 200 years it was forced to sell its products only to the Kingdom of Denmark, which it was a colonial possession of. This can make it pretty surprising when you hear that by income per capita, Iceland is one of the 10 richest countries on Earth, and by average salary, it's in the top 3. Icelanders enjoy some of the highest quality lives out of anyone on Earth, despite the fact that even 50 years ago, they produced only a tenth of what they do today. The secret has been by smart supply-side economics on the part of their government, particularly of their energy and electricity resources. Per person, Iceland uses the second most amount of energy on Earth, only behind gas and slave-rich Qatar. But stripping out transportation and heating and only looking at electricity use, Icelanders have the most amount of electricity out of anywhere on Earth. It's not even close. Norway is a distant second. They generate 52 megawatt hours of electricity per person. Americans have less than a quarter of that. In total, that means they produce 20 terawatt hours, around the same level as Syria or Massachusetts. The island has no coal, gas, or nuclear infrastructure as well, with much of the energy coming from geothermal sources and most of the electricity from hydropower. It's a little, what you say, abundant, and it's allowed this small and cold country of less than 400,000 people to punch highly above their weight in terms of energy research, growing tropical fruits, and being the smallest country ever to make the World Cup. But it wasn't always this way. Iceland used to be a poor hinterland of Denmark. Back when agriculture dominated our ways of life, Iceland had some obvious problems. Most people on the island were self-sufficient farmers, but because of the tiny population and lack of resources, many moved throughout the year between the coasts in the winter to fish and pastures in the summer to tend sheep or cattle. This meant urban specialization never really happened, with only a couple of towns popping up. The trade monopoly with Denmark didn't help either. All the export products, mainly wool and fish, were directed to Copenhagen, with trading profits split between the king and Danish merchants. Most positions of power came from royal appointments or involvement with the church, and the vast majority of peasants were tenants tied to the land. Most of Iceland's history was one of vast inequality marked by stagnation and isolation. Despite the fact that this monopoly ended in 1855, like the rest of Europe, it wasn't until the 1870s where structural transformation took place, as Icelanders got legislative power for themselves. Unlike most countries though, which have a manufacturing phase between agriculture and services, Iceland's factories never became the dominant force in their economy. Instead, industrialization started in the fisheries with the adoption of steam trawlers and fish processing plants. The country, so small, has always depended on trade. However, that trade has depended on the technology available to do so. For example, in medieval Iceland, there was little point in shipping cheap, bulky items because it was far too expensive. Most of their imports were small, luxury goods like silver, wine, and whetstones. The exports have usually been derived from their natural resources. Up to 90% of the country's foreign exchange earnings were from fish until the 1960s. And when the fish stock had plummeted throughout the 1970s, this is when Iceland had started to transition to the electric economy it is today. For most of its history, Iceland was dependent on imported coal and domestic peat and dry dung for its energy uses. That changed in the early 1900s when the first hydropower station was made in a small town south of Reykjavik. It was a beastly 9 kilowatt machine used to power a single carpenter's shop. That's enough to power about 3 modern fridges. Many in Iceland figured they could follow a model laid out by the Norwegians at the time: build dams, provide electricity, and attract heavy industries like fertilizer or cement factories. The difference was, Norway allowed foreign companies to build these dams as long as they were given to the government after a certain amount of time, while Iceland completely banned foreign investment into them. As a result, these generators were small, built by individuals for individual use, usually for an individual farm. The state only got involved during the Great Depression, taking over from these tiny generators financed by individuals, and after some decades of chaos, created the publicly owned Landsvirkjun company to build new generators. Even when electricity prices were low and they weren't finding any foreign investors, the Landsvirkjun built to overcapacity, flooding the market with cheap electricity. Meanwhile, another innovation was taking shape that took even more pressure off of their electrical grid. Iceland sits between 2 tectonic plates. As the country literally gets ripped apart, magma rises to the surface, heating up many pools of water. Hot springs, geysers, and volcanoes cover the island. Many